When Amber Lane stood up at the dinner table, her hands shaking, and said she was pregnant, the air went cold. The room was full of family, friends, and business partners. Forks stopped moving. No one said a word. My husband, Colin, turned pale. I just watched him, calm as ever, because I had known this day would come. What no one in that room knew was that I had been waiting for it. I already knew everything, and I was ready. Colin had been acting strange for months. He came home late, his excuses never matching his tired eyes. He smelled different, like a perfume I didn't wear. His phone was always face down, and his laughter faded when I walked into the room. I had my suspicions, but I didn't ask. Instead, I smiled, kissed his cheek, and went on with my day. Inside, I was studying him. We built our company together years ago, Heart Builders. Back when we were young and broke, we had nothing but a small office and big dreams. I handled the numbers, the contracts, the clients. Colin handled charm. It worked. People loved him. They called him the man who could sell anything. I used to admire that. But lately, it just felt like a lie. One night, I went through some old files in my office. I don't know what made me do it, maybe instinct. I found old business registration papers tucked away in a folder. My name was on every line. The founder. The owner. Colin had never changed it. I remember sitting there, staring at that paper, my heart pounding. He thought we shared the company. But on paper, it was mine. Completely mine. From that night, I started to see things differently. His distance didn't hurt as much anymore. I stopped asking questions. I let him believe I was still clueless. When he said he was working late, I just nodded. When he bought new clothes, I complimented them. But every move he made, I was one step ahead, watching him dig his own grave. The night of that dinner, I knew something was coming. He had been nervous all week, pacing around, checking his phone. He said it was a special dinner to celebrate a new partnership. I played along. I wore a simple black dress and my calmest smile. When Amber stood up and made her announcement, everyone froze. Colin looked like he couldn't breathe. I just sat there, hands folded on my lap, feeling the weight of months of silence fall away. People turned to me, waiting for my reaction, but I gave them none. Inside, I was steady. I already knew how this story would end. He thought that night would ruin me. But he didn't know I had already taken everything he valued most, quietly, piece by piece, while he was too busy chasing someone else. And as he sat there, lost for words, I finally felt free. The change started small, so small that I almost missed it. Colin began taking more business calls at night, his voice low, stepping out onto the porch whenever the phone rang. He started wearing a new cologne, one I didn't recognize, sharp and musky. When I asked about it, he said a client had given it to him. I nodded and pretended to believe him. That was the first lie I let pass. Soon after, the credit card bills started showing strange charges. Fancy restaurants I'd never been to, expensive wine, and boutique stores I didn't shop at. Colin brushed it off as business expenses. Client dinners, he said, with that same confident smile he always used to get his way. But there was a faint tremor in his voice now, something uneasy. I didn't argue. Instead, I kept the bills, every one of them, and placed them in a folder I labeled quietly in my mind. Truth. One evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. I loved last night. Same time next week. The name at the top made my stomach twist, Amber Lane. I knew that name. She was the young interior designer Colin had hired a few months back. She was bright, soft-spoken, always polite when I met her. I remembered how he praised her ideas, saying she brought fresh life to the company. Now I understood what kind of life he meant. I didn't confront him. Instead, I started digging. Every day, after Colin left for work, I checked the company calendar. His meetings didn't match his receipts. I found invoices for hotel stays and gifts labeled under client relations. One hotel bill had 2 dinners charged, 2 drinks, 1 room. My hands shook as I read it, but I refused to cry. Not yet. The betrayal burned deep. It wasn't just that he was with someone else. It was that he had used our company to do it. Every dollar spent on her came from the business we built together, the one I poured my heart into. He was using my work, my effort, to fund his lies. That realization hurt more than anything. At night, I lay beside him, listening to him breathe, wondering how someone could lie so easily. He still kissed my cheek before bed. He still told me I was beautiful. And I smiled back, pretending everything was fine. But inside, something in me had gone quiet. I began keeping notes, dates, places, receipts, even how long his calls lasted. I told myself it wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I wanted to see how far he would go, how deep the hole would get before he realized I was watching. And every morning, I looked in the mirror and promised myself I wouldn't break. Not yet, because I wasn't done watching him destroy himself, one secret at a time. It started with small changes in the office. Colin began spending more time with Amber, the young designer he'd hired. At first, he said she had a good eye for detail and fresh ideas clients love. Soon, she was in every meeting, sitting close to him, taking notes, nodding at his every word. He started introducing her to clients as his creative partner. The title wasn't official, but everyone knew what it meant. I watched from my office window as they laughed together in the parking lot, her hand brushing his arm. I felt something heavy press against my chest, but I didn't show it. I just closed the blinds and went back to work. I'd been with Colin since we were both nobodies, scraping by and sharing takeout dinners on folding chairs. We built heart builders from the ground up. I handled contracts, budgets, clients, all the behind-the-scenes work that kept everything running. Colin was the face of the company, the talker. It used to feel like a partnership. Now, I was being pushed out, one decision at a time. He started holding quick meetings without me, saying I didn't need to attend. I'd find out later that deals had been signed, accounts had changed, and employees were being reassigned. When I asked about it, he'd smile and say, "You've been working too hard. Let me handle things for a while." It was almost laughable. He thought I didn't see what was happening. People in the office whispered, trying not to meet my eyes. Some pitied me. Others avoided me altogether. Rumors spread fast, and I didn't need to ask what they were saying. They all knew about Amber. Everyone except the woman who was supposed to matter most. I didn't confront him. I kept my calm, the same way I had since I found out. But that week, I made a quiet appointment with an attorney. I told no one. The lawyer, an older man with a steady voice, listened as I explained the situation. Then he asked me one question that stuck in my mind. Mrs. Hart, whose name is on the company registration. That night, I stayed late at the office. I opened old folders, dusty from years of being untouched. There it was, in black and white, my name, listed as the sole owner. Collins wasn't there at all. He'd signed over everything in the early days when his credit was bad, trusting me completely back then. As I read those papers, something inside me shifted. The hurt didn't disappear, but it turned into something steadier, control. I realized that no matter how much he tried to push me aside, the company still belonged to me. Every decision he made, every deal he signed, every dollar he spent, all of it was under my name. I closed the folder, turned off the light, and walked out of the office that night without a word. Let him keep his creative partner. I already knew how the story would end. The night I found the papers with my name on them, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk with the lights off, reading every line again and again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. There it was, written clearly, Evelyn Hart, sole owner of Hart Builders Incorporated. Colin's name wasn't anywhere. Not as a partner, not as a co-founder. Nothing. Back when we started the company, his credit was bad, and the bank wouldn't approve him for anything. So, we agreed to put everything under my name. It was supposed to be temporary. He said he'd fix it later, once things got better. But he never did. He probably forgot about it, or maybe he thought I had changed it for him. Either way, the business he was parading around as his own legally belonged to me. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. All the late nights, the long meetings, the clients we'd won together, all of it had led to this moment. I wasn't just part of the company. I was the company. Every account, every property, every cent, mine. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For months, I had been walking around feeling powerless, watching him lie to my face. Now I had the one thing that made him who he was. I didn't tell anyone. Not my lawyer, not my friends, not even my family. I knew silence was my best weapon. Colin still thought I was the quiet, forgiving wife who didn't ask questions. He didn't know that every smile I gave him was now part of a plan. I started keeping track of his moves. The meetings he took, the deals he signed, the money he spent. I knew it was only a matter of time before he'd do something that would destroy him completely. I just had to be patient. I gathered copies of documents, old agreements, and bank statements. I made sure everything was organized and backed up. Every single piece of proof that showed the company was mine was locked safely away. When Colin came home late, smelling like perfume, I didn't flinch. When Amber started showing up more at events, I didn't react. I wanted him to feel secure. I wanted him to think he had won. Because only then would the fall hit harder. Sometimes, I'd sit across from him at dinner, watching him talk about business, acting like the proud owner. He had no idea that everything he bragged about, the contracts, the buildings, the money, was mine. It was almost sad, watching him live in that illusion. Almost. I wasn't planning to destroy him out of anger anymore. This wasn't about tears or heartbreak. It was about balance. He had taken my trust and built his lies on it. Now I was going to take back what was rightfully mine, slowly, quietly, until the day he realized I had been in control all along. It was late when I heard them. Colin thought I was asleep, but I had gotten up to get some water. As I passed his office, I heard his voice, low, careful, but sharp. I stopped by the door, the light from his desk spilling into the hallway. He was on the phone, and I didn't have to wonder who he was talking to. The softness in his tone gave it away. It was Amber. He laughed quietly, the same way he used to with me years ago. Just a few more weeks, he said. Once the merger goes through, I'll file for divorce. She won't get a thing. There was a pause, and then his voice dropped even lower. Don't worry, baby. The company's practically mine already. She's just a name on paper. Those words hit me like a blade. He truly believed I was nothing but a name. I stood there, staring at the wall, gripping the glass in my hand so tight I thought it would break. After a few seconds, I forced myself to breathe and walked quietly back to our bedroom. I didn't cry. The time for that had passed long ago. That was the night my heart went cold. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to him hang up the phone and move around the house. I realized then that he wasn't just cheating on me. He was planning to erase me completely. Every bit of my work, my effort, my name. He wanted to take everything we built and hand it to someone else. That was when my decision was made. The next morning, I went to the office before him. I sat at my desk, calm and steady, and opened my files. I started transferring small assets, properties, accounts, even the company vehicles, under my personal name. I made copies of every legal document, every contract, and every tax record. I stored them safely, both in hard copies and digitally. I contacted my lawyer again, this time without hesitation. We spoke in short, precise terms. He helped me prepare everything quietly. Paperwork that would make sure Colin couldn't touch a single cent without my permission. I didn't tell him about the phone call. I didn't need to. The betrayal had already said enough. At home, I acted as if nothing had changed. I cooked dinner, smiled when he talked about his day, even kissed him goodnight. He had no idea that every move I made now had a purpose. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was planning. In the evenings, when he worked late or went out for meetings, I stayed home, reviewing files and writing down every detail of what he was doing. I didn't need to rush. He was digging his own grave, and I was only preparing the shovel. By the time he finally decided to destroy me, he would discover that everything he thought he owned, every account, every building, every deal, already belonged to me. And when that day came, I promised myself I wouldn't flinch. I'd watch him fall, the same way he watched me trust him. A month later, Colin told me he was planning a special dinner. He said it was to celebrate a big step for the company, something that would change everything. His tone was proud, confident, even excited. I already knew what it meant. This was going to be his moment, the one where he finally tried to show the world that he didn't need me. I agreed to go, pretending not to suspect a thing. The dinner was held at a private restaurant downtown. The place was elegant, with soft music and warm lights. Long tables were set for family, close friends, and a few business partners. Everyone was laughing, sipping wine, waiting for Colin's big announcement. He moved around the room, shaking hands and smiling like a man who had already won. Amber sat across the table from me, wearing a fitted cream dress and too much perfume. She avoided my eyes at first, but I caught the nervous glance she gave him every few minutes. Colin stood behind his chair, his hand resting on Amber's shoulder. Before we begin, he said, raising his glass, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This dinner means a lot to me, to us. He looked down at her and smiled, that same rehearsed grin I'd seen 100 times before. The whispers started around the table. People could sense something coming, something bigger than a business update. I stayed quiet, watching. My face was calm, but inside, my thoughts were sharp and clear. I had spent weeks preparing for this. The papers were signed, the transfers completed, and everything tied neatly with my name on it. He thought tonight would be his rebirth. He had no idea he was walking straight into his own collapse. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, Amber stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her hands trembled slightly, but she smiled and said, "Actually, I have something to say." The room fell silent. Colin froze, clearly not expecting it. Amber looked around, then said, "I'm pregnant." For a few seconds, no one moved. The sound of a fork dropping somewhere in the background was the only noise. Colin's smile vanished, replaced by confusion and panic. His mother gasped. His business partner coughed into his napkin. The quiet whispers grew louder, spreading around the table like fire. I looked at Colin and then at Amber, who stood there glowing with a mix of fear and pride. I didn't say a word. I just took a sip of my wine and watched. On the outside, I was the picture of calm. Inside, I felt something close to satisfaction. Colin turned pale, struggling to speak. He hadn't planned for this. He stuttered, his words tangled, trying to take control of the moment again. But the room was already lost to the shock. Everyone stared at him, waiting for an explanation. I sat there quietly, a small, hidden smile forming on my lips. He thought this dinner would be the start of his new life. He just didn't know it was the beginning of his end. The room was chaos. Voices overlapped, people whispered, and Colin stood frozen, his face pale as paper. Amber's announcement had turned the evening upside down. His parents looked stunned, his business partners looked embarrassed, and Amber looked both proud and terrified. I sat still, letting the noise swirl around me. My heart was steady. I had waited long enough for this moment. Colin tried to regain control, raising his hand and forcing a shaky smile. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice tight. "This wasn't how I planned tonight to go, but..." I stood up slowly, my chair sliding back with a soft scrape that silenced the room faster than he could. Every eye turned toward me. Colin stopped mid-sentence, confused. I looked around at everyone, family, friends, employees, even Amber, and then at him. "Since we're making announcements," I said calmly, "I have one too." The room quieted completely. I could hear the sound of someone's fork clinking against a plate, then nothing else. Colin's jaw tightened. "Evelyn, this isn't the time," he began, but I didn't let him finish. I reached into my purse and pulled out a neatly folded envelope. "This won't take long," I said. My voice was steady, clear. I handed the envelope to a man sitting near the end of the table, my lawyer. He had been invited to the dinner as a guest, but he knew exactly why he was there. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing up, "Mrs. Hart has asked me to clarify a matter concerning Hart Builders Incorporated." He opened the papers and read from them. According to official state records, the company is solely owned by Mrs. Evelyn Hart. Mr. Colin Hart has no legal ownership or executive rights. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. Colin's face went blank. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Amber looked between us, her eyes wide with disbelief. A few people gasped quietly. I looked at him, keeping my voice calm. "You've been working for me, Colin. Every deal you made, every project you bragged about, it all belonged to me. I just thought it was time everyone knew the truth." Colin took a step toward me, his voice breaking. "You can't do this," he said, almost whispering. "You can't humiliate me like this." I met his eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt no fear, no sadness. "You did that yourself," I said simply. "I'm just setting the record straight." No one moved. No one spoke. The lawyer placed the documents back in the envelope and sat down quietly. Colin's hands were shaking. Amber's face had turned pale. The dinner that was supposed to be his victory had turned into his undoing. I picked up my purse, gave a polite nod to the guests, and said softly, "Thank you all for coming." Then I walked out, leaving Colin standing there in the ruins of his perfect night. For a few seconds after I walked out, I could still hear the silence behind me. No one knew what to say. Colin's world had just collapsed in front of everyone he respected. The man who once acted like he owned everything now stood with nothing. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew what his face would look like, pale, shocked, and lost. The next morning, I went to the office early. I had already spoken with my lawyer, and the divorce papers were ready. I signed them without hesitation. My hand didn't shake, not even once. When Colin arrived later that morning, he looked exhausted. His eyes were red, and he tried to smile, but it didn't reach his face. He closed the door behind him and said, "Evelyn, we need to talk." I didn't even look up from my desk. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "You made your choices." He stepped closer, desperate. "Please, just listen. We can fix this." I didn't mean. I raised my hand to stop him. "You didn't mean to get caught," I said quietly. "That's the only thing you're sorry about." He stood there for a moment, speechless. Then his voice cracked. "Amber's gone," he said. "She left this morning. She said she didn't know about the ownership. She thought I was in charge." I looked up at him then. "You used her, Colin. You used everyone. You built a life on lies, and you thought no one would notice. But I did." He slumped into the chair across from me, rubbing his face with his hands. "You can't take the company from me," he whispered. "It's all I have." I leaned back and looked at him calmly. "No, Colin," I said. "It's all I have. You just borrowed it for a while." That afternoon, I called a company-wide meeting. Everyone gathered in the conference room, the same one where Colin had spent years showing off. This time, I stood at the front. "From today forward," I said, "Heart Builders will continue under my leadership. Those who have been loyal will stay. Those who haven't can leave." The employees clapped softly, unsure what to say, but one by one, they started addressing me differently. "Yes, Mrs. Hart." "Understood, Mrs. Hart." That was the moment I knew things had changed. When Colin tried to enter the building the next day, security stopped him. His access card had been disabled. I watched from my office window as he argued with the guards, his voice rising. Then he saw me through the glass. For a long moment, he just stared, his face empty. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I just turned away and continued my work. By the end of the week, his name was removed from every document, every door, every file. He was gone from the company, from my life, and from the empire he once thought was his. And for the first time in years, I finally felt free, completely and absolutely free. The days after Colin's downfall felt strangely quiet. The chaos that had filled my life for months was suddenly gone, replaced by a calm I hadn't felt in years. I went to work early each morning and stayed late, focused and clear-headed. The company needed fixing, and I knew exactly what had to be done. The first thing I did was review every department. I met with each manager, listened carefully, and took notes. I already knew who had been loyal and who had turned a blind eye while Colin played his games. The ones who stood by me stayed. The ones who helped cover for him were gone by the end of the week. There were no arguments, no scenes. Just quiet, professional endings. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. I changed the office layout, updated policies, and made sure every contract and project reflected the values I believed in: honesty, trust, and fairness. Heart Builders started to feel like mine again, not just in name, but in spirit. Clients who had avoided us began to return. They said they trusted me, that the company felt stable under my leadership. Hearing that made the long nights worth it. One afternoon, I received an email from Amber. It was long, emotional, full of apologies. She wrote that she didn't know Colin was lying to her, that she believed he was separated, and that she never meant to hurt me. She said she had lost her job and didn't know what to do next. I read her message twice and then closed it without replying. She was part of the mess he created, and I wasn't going to waste my peace on cleaning up what they broke together. Colin tried to reach out too. He called a few times, left messages, even showed up at my lawyer's office once, asking to talk. I didn't answer any of them. There was nothing left to say. His reputation had fallen apart. Word spread quickly in our industry. No one wanted to work with him, and his name became a warning instead of a promise. The man who once walked into a room with pride now couldn't even get a meeting. His family stopped defending him after the dinner. They knew what he had done, and they kept their distance. He had lost everything: his position, his respect, his future. Even the name Hart that he used to wear so proudly was no longer his to use. Meanwhile, the company began to grow again. I hired new designers, new managers, and a small team that shared my vision. The building felt alive, filled with energy and purpose instead of lies and tension. Every decision I made was a reminder that I had survived and rebuilt something stronger. At night, when I locked up the office and stepped outside, I often looked up at the sign that read Heart Builders Incorporated. My name still glowed there, steady and bright. I had lost a husband, yes, but I found myself, and that was worth more than anything he ever tried to take. Months passed, and the seasons began to change. The city felt different now, calmer, slower, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath. I drove to the office early one morning, the sun just starting to rise, painting the sky a soft gold. When I stepped out of my car and looked up, I saw the sign above the building, Heart Builders Incorporated. My name shone beside it in clean, bold letters. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it. This place had once been built out of love and dreams. Then it became a battlefield filled with lies. But now, standing there, it felt like mine again, peaceful, strong, alive. I walked inside, the familiar scent of coffee and fresh paint greeting me. The staff smiled as I passed, their respect quiet but sincere. No one looked at me with pity anymore. They saw me for what I was, the woman who kept everything standing when the man beside her tried to tear it down. I walked through the halls, remembering the years I had spent here. The late nights, the arguments, the small victories, the heartbreak. Every room held a piece of me, pieces I once thought I had lost. But I realized now that I had never lost them at all. They had just been waiting for me to return stronger. In my office, the morning light fell across the desk. The walls were lined with blueprints and photos of completed projects, buildings we had once dreamed about together. I traced my fingers over one of the photos, a quiet smile forming. The pain was gone now. There was no anger left, no bitterness. Only peace. Colin hadn't been part of my thoughts for weeks. He had disappeared from the city after losing everything. I heard he tried starting a new business, but it failed before it began. That wasn't my concern anymore. His choices were his own, and I had no interest in following his trail of regret. My revenge had never been about watching him suffer. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself that he tried to take away, my confidence, my strength, my peace. I sat down in my chair, opened a fresh file, and began reviewing a new project proposal. The sound of laughter floated from the hallway as my employees started their day. For the first time in a long while, the future felt open, full of possibility. Before leaving the office that evening, I stopped by the front entrance once more. The glass doors reflected my image beneath the shining company logo. Evelyn Hart. The name stood proud, unshaken. I smiled, not the forced kind I used to wear beside him, but a real, quiet smile that came from somewhere deep inside. I had lost a husband, yes, but I had gained something far more valuable. I had taken back my life, my name, and my power. And that, I realized, was the only ending I ever needed.